It's the start of week 3, folks. Things are starting to get a little bit busier. Mayor Burton now has a hat. This meeting feels like it's right. So it's week 3. Just by way of reminder, please utilize the QR code scanner to sign in and also pull up the tracking list. And also, please remember, as we are having our deliberations and discussions today on various issues, to one, wait for the mic. Last week, we had a tremendous attendance at this meeting, and there were more people attending online than there were in person. So it's very important for those folks participating online that we wait for the microphone, and then when you have the microphone, please state your name and give your city. See? Microphone, name, city, before you launch into whatever your really brilliant points are on the bill. First order of business is we need to approve the minutes of January 27th. Again, I'm hoping that you have thoroughly reviewed and studied and absorbed these minutes and that someone is prepared to make a motion to approve them. From Dan Dugan, we have a motion to approve. We have a second from Richard Higginson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Great. The minutes are approved, and I am now turning the microphone over to Justin.
All right, thank you for that. Welcome, everybody. We're going to refresh some of this. I just want to let you know, so we're week 2, 15 days in, 2 weeks down, 5 weeks to go. We're at the start of week 3. The session started on a Tuesday. We haven't been here for 2 full weeks yet. Anyway, whatever makes you feel better. We're in, and we're going to be here for a minute. Somebody asked the question, I just want to answer it really quickly, is how do we decide what we talk about in LPC? And that's a great question. We make it up till the second before. But there are, a lot of what we bring up in LPC are the wide-ranging bills that are going to impact the most amount of cities, and what we think is also going to have the largest impact. So that's a lot of what we bring here is the most wide-ranging, biggest, what we think are highest priority bills. There are, I checked in with the staff this morning, there are roughly 40 bills that staff has worked on to this point that have in some way either been held in a committee, amended, negotiated on, changed in some way. And so there's a lot of little bills, mid-level bills, that we have tweaked, that we have changed, that we've amended, that we have hopefully made better for you, that we don't even necessarily get to talk about in LPC here. But so 40 plus bills that we've already worked on in 2 weeks. Not to mention all these big bills that we're still negotiating on. So there's a lot going on. It's not going to slow down. More and more committees coming up. But we're going to go a little out of order on the agenda today, just because there are a few things pending as we speak that we need to get some updates on. So we're going to run way ahead. Don't worry, for everyone who's really excited about land use, we'll come back. We'll get there. So really quick, just some quick updates on water bills. I talked about HB 274 last week. The update is I hope there would be a substitute for this one because there's a couple tweaks that are coming, but we didn't get one. So the update is still position pending. There is no update. We talked about fluoride a little bit in the emails throughout the week. This was the bill that already went through committee. We're bringing this one up to let you know that our staff recommended position, and this does not happen all that often, is no position. We take a no position on bills when we don't have a consensus from the members. And based on the polling that we did among you, we do not have anywhere close to a consensus on this one. We have people on both far sides of this issue and everything in between. So as of right now, our recommendation is no position on fluoride. Some of you have very strong feelings on one side and some on the other. So as of right now, we're not taking position on this one, is our plan going forward. The other quick water bill that I wanted to update you on is stormwater bill. If you remember, HB 507 passed last year. We knew there would be changes this year. That is one of the bills that's sort of hanging out there in the ether that has not yet been fully drafted yet, but we do expect that. So if anyone who's just only coming to this meeting because you really want to hear about the stormwater bill, not yet. It is coming, but we aren't quite there yet. Any questions on those really quick? Just those quick 3 water things. All right, beautiful. With that, Cam, we're going to jump over to you ready to talk revenue? And then we'll circle back on a couple things. And I should also like to thank Mayor Palmer from Harriman for coming this week after how we treated him last week. So Mayor Palmer, grateful you're here.
Thank you, Justin. And thanks everybody for being here. Another terrific crowd, both in person and online. Cassidy, how many folks do we have online as of now? Recognize that the number will continue to increase. So 157 online plus everybody else in the room. So that's awesome. Thank you for being here. And I just want to add one other thing to what Justin was saying about how this agenda gets set. We work closely with the officers on front. The officers meet Tuesdays and Thursdays with league staff. And then on Fridays, we meet with the City Managers Association. And then we have our daily briefing every day. So through all of those channels, plus daily email and everything else, that's how we've funnel through what needs to come before LPC for consideration. Because otherwise we could talk about every bill every day. Okay, my objective here, you've seen this slide for the last few weeks. The retail incentives bill is coming soon. We still don't have language on a transportation utility fee bill. So stay tuned for that. The Slido results from last week were very informative. So thank you for filling out those Slido questions. We showed this slide last week. And once some of these bills start to pop out, we will basically turn this into an infographic to make it easier for you to explain to your legislators the difference between a tax and a fee, and then why it's so important for us to stand up for our fee authority. So for now, stay tuned on that piece. The tourism tax side has been moving. There's still not a bill yet. So this is more for informational purposes, just so you're aware. Within the LPC, we've had a tourism work group, a tourism community work group, and we've been looking at 3 different main categories here. So for communities that don't really have a big tourism impact, what will likely come out of this bill won't affect you much, but it could affect every county, and it will affect a decent number of cities. So that's why I wanted to take a moment and just give you some situational awareness of what's under consideration. So first, there is discussion about increasing the state TRT from its current 0.32 rate to something else, and then having that money available for tourism mitigation or outdoor infrastructure, outdoor recreation infrastructure, which is what it's currently used for, and potentially sharing with certain local governments under certain circumstances. The second key point is around county tourism taxes, specifically TRT, so there's been discussion around the other taxes too. As a reminder, for those of you who may not be familiar with how county TRT works, 27 of the 29 counties in Utah have imposed both the 3% and the 1.25% county TRT, and then per statute, a certain percentage of those dollars has to be spent on promotion or related items. And then per statute, there's a bunch of things that you can spend the non-promotion money on. And so there's discussion, the non-promotion money on, as well as discussion that under certain circumstances, maybe changing what the percentage is for the promotional dollars within those county taxes. That then leads to conversations of, if you're making changes to those county taxes, what is the role of the cities therein, particularly your high impact communities that have a lot of impact from tourism within their city boundaries. So that's one of the unanswered questions we've been working through. And then the third category is municipal tourism taxes. There are currently 21 cities that oppose resort community taxes. You have to meet a statutory threshold in order to impose a resort community tax. If you do so, if you meet that threshold and you impose the tax, it's a general fund revenue for those handful of communities. And then 129 cities have imposed what's called the municipal TRT. So that's different from the county TRT, smaller dollar amount, but actually more flexibility for the cities, ranges from 1 to 1.5%. So all of these pieces are part of the discussion. Representative Bolender and Senator Vickers are the 2 key legislators, and then it has involvement of both House and Senate leadership. So again, our objective here was first situationally, so that people knew what some of the moving pieces were. And then second, we've had a work group of our tourism cities that have met a few times over the last few weeks. So if there is anybody within the sound of my voice who's a tourism impact city that you're hearing this for the first time, just please reach out to league staff. We'll actually be sitting down with Representative Bolender and Senator Vickers later today to continue the negotiations on this one. So any questions just in general around tourism taxes? Mayor Zoltansky.
Mayor Zoltansky from Sandy, what are some examples of non-promotion activity that are being proposed?
Yeah, great question. So one example is the development and maintenance of trails. So right now you have these two categories in state law around how counties can use the dollars. There's the promotion piece, which includes things like spending money on convention centers or using money for advertisement. And then you have the non-promotional money, which is around the visitor experience. And in certain counties, you have more flexibility for infrastructure than in other counties. And that's one of the objectives of this whole conversation is, do you actually simplify it and make it easier to understand that in all counties you can use the non-promotional money on these things? So trails is one of the examples that has come up is even if you don't change the promotional percentage, do you open up the non-promotional percentage to allow for the use of those dollars for trail development and maintenance? Any other questions about any of these three buckets? Okay, then just as a reminder, if you're a tourism, heavily impacted tourism community and you are not yet involved in these conversations, let league staff know. And this is going to pick up momentum this week. Well, before billboards, let's do, Carson, can you come do House Bill 379? Do we have a slide for it or are you just presenting it? Okay, I'll let you drive to 379. Yeah, it was in.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. HB 379 is hopefully a relatively simple bill, at least mechanically. The intent of the bill sponsor is to get more accurate numbers for especially high growth cities, but for cities generally. So basically what the bill would do is say that the Utah Population Committee, which provides population estimates to state and county entities, basically those numbers would now be preferred over census numbers for distribution formulas of state dollars to local governments. There are some federal requirements on with some federal dollars that are appropriated. Those would continue to be Census Bureau dollars, but basically anything that's not required by the federal government to use census numbers would prefer the UPC estimates. This is a little bit of a policy shift. And where UPC estimates are not available, they'll continue to use census numbers. But we've heard from many of our high growth communities some concern that things like BNC road distributions, some sales tax distributions are not keeping pace with their rapid population growth. So that's the gist of the bill. The other piece of it is really just that Utah Population Center can work with local governments to get better data. It's not specific what that data is. There's some specific parameters around anything that's protected by protected records under grandma. Basically, you would just work with you just create an agreement with the UPC to share information and determine how that information is used and what governance there is around it. So we don't have any urgent concerns about this bill. We think that there might be some more tweaks that needed to be made that changes a whole bunch of different sections of code. So we're still kind of reviewing it. But yeah, we don't have a current position, but we recommend working towards support because we think traditionally the policy committee and the board has emphasized the importance of good data. So we want to be making policy decisions based on the best data available to us. Are there any questions? Yeah, Mayor Burton.
How does the Utah Population Committee, UPC, come up with that count? My name is Dirk Burton. I'm the mayor of West Jordan City. I did not ride my bicycle here today. I actually drove.
For the record, Mayor, I did see a bicycle outside the building. I was wondering if you got a new bike, but yeah, that's a great question. I don't know for sub-county population estimates how that will look exactly. They might ask for information based on building permits, based on some of your own counts. It's not prescriptive in the statute. Sub-county estimates, like cities, are a little bit more complicated than county and state estimates. Those are a little bit more in the aggregate and less prone to rapid change, whereas municipal estimates can fluctuate a lot. You see that within current census estimates. So yeah, I don't have a great answer for you, Mayor, but I think basically the UPC will just try to take any and all information that they can use to make that estimate. But I will say the UPC has representation from a number of universities, from the state legislative fiscal analyst's office. So I think there is a lot of expertise on that committee and feel pretty comfortable with their ability to make accurate predictions.
So just to clarify, so Norm Beagley, Santa Clara City Manager. The question that I have is this a shall or a may? And because everything or plan, water study, unless it be used by the state.
Yeah, sorry, good clarification. This will just be for state agencies determining funds. So this will not force you to use different estimates than you're already using. It does say the local governments shall work with the UPC, but it basically says if any of the data is unavailable, you don't have to provide it. So I think it'll more likely be on kind of a case-by-case basis what information different cities have, but it's not requiring you to modify your general plans based on different estimates. That's still up to your prerogative.
And this is Mark Christensen, Saratoga Springs. This is really important for those high growth communities because we feel like we're being hugely underrepresented. And so, you know, I don't know the devil of all the details in this particular bill, but anything that gets us closer, we estimate right now, we had a meeting with Kim, and we estimated that we were about 60,000 population separated between there. So it's a big number. Big deal for us as we're looking at high growth numbers coming in.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and it's, again, we're one of the fastest growing states in the country, so I think it's important that we're getting the best data possible to make those decisions. Cool. Well, if anybody has any other questions or suggestions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll relay that feedback on to Representative Gracious. Next. Land use. Yeah,
Okay, perfect. We're going to go now back up to the agenda now that we're all staff's here who needs to be here for this portion of the conversation. So this is the housing land use section, and our objective here is to walk you through the bills that are currently out. So Raj, we'll do land use, then we'll do broadband. Okay. So Jared and I will be co-presenting these bills. I'll hit a couple of them and then turn it over to Jared. So first, SB 181. This is the first Commission on Housing Affordability bill that came out. This bill is in committee this afternoon. So you'll notice the staff recommendation here is amend, work towards support. And that's because the bill is currently drafted right now is not at all what it's going to look like in the next few days. Part of the fun. But it is in committee this afternoon, so it's going to move through the process. There are really two key components to this bill. I'll start with the bottom one, the recodification of state housing boards. That is unlikely to happen. When I was putting the slide together over the weekend, it was still kind of up in the air. Now that's unlikely to happen, which is why the bill is going to get redone. From a league perspective, that doesn't impact us one way or the other, but it's just when you see a substitute come out with a whole bunch of red on it because they've deleted everything, that's why, is because they're pressing pause on that effort, and it'll be part of the housing plan conversation going forward. No, it'll still be 181. They're just going to strip out the language right now that recodifies the housing boards. Yeah, so I'll just say it again. Right now, SB 181 recodifies all the housing boards, changes only in Walker, and does a lot of things at the state level that, generally speaking, are okay for cities. It's okay if they change it. It's okay if they don't change it. They're, as of this morning, not planning to go forward with all of those changes. They're going to wait until the state housing plan gets up and running in the next few months. So as a result, if you look at SB 181 right now, you'll see a whole bunch of language doing a bunch of recodification. That's not going to happen. So the substitute's going to pull all of that out. Okay. The other key component of this is the parking and the garage stuff that we've talked about at multiple LPCs now going back to August. And so the current language in that bill conflicts with itself. And so we have a meeting at 4:00 today to hopefully finalize everybody's intent on this. And what we have offered stands as it has for the last little while. Standard parking stall size for single family, detached, and townhome. It would be different if it's an exterior versus an enclosed spot. Can't require a garage if the unit being built is a deed restricted affordable owner occupied unit. So that way the benefit makes it to that home buyer. And then tandem spots that are back to back, as long as they're accessible, they would count as 2 spots. And then right now there's language in there that restrict our ability to negotiate into development agreements about parking and garages. And we want all of that out and everything below that out. And so that's what we hashing through this afternoon. But we'll be negotiating that after the bill has already moved through committee. And that's just part of the fun up here. So I just wanted people to be aware of kind of the weirdness of that timing and that SB 181 will be moving forward. Okay. House Bill 360. This is the second Commission on Housing Affordability bill. And this bill is actually pretty short. Part of this deals with the use of potential state surplus land for affordable owner occupied housing. And part of this makes some changes to grandma, all of which I think has a net positive for local government. So number one, modifies the housing corporation, but the second authorizes government entity, which includes cities, to grant land with or without consideration for moderate income housing. So the objective here is if Cameron City has 2 acres of ground that Cameron City owns currently, and Cameron City wants that land to be utilized for affordable owner occupied housing, this language would give Cameron City the ability to grant it to, say, a nonprofit developer or even for-profit developer, so long as it's available for owner occupied affordable housing units. So in other words, Cameron City does not have to dispose of that land at the highest possible value. Cameron City would have the option to say, rather than selling it at the highest value, we're going to grant it to an individual or an entity with this condition of deed restricted affordable owner occupied housing. So the state's looking at that for state surplus land, and this would authorize that for all public entities. As an option, yeah, this would be optional. Now, that's why the word is authorizes, not requires that government entities do that. Also authorize government entity, contractor, or partner with an entity for the development of moderate income housing, and then extends the ability to close a meeting under grandma to discuss the development or financing of that political subdivision on land. So coming back to my example, Cameron City under grandma right now can close a meeting to discuss state-owned land. We cannot close that meeting to discuss Cameron City-owned land for this purpose. So this would extend that allowance in the Open and Public Meetings Act. I wrote grandma, that should have been OPMA, sorry about that. So it should be OPMA, not grandma, but extend that flexibility when we're talking about political subdivision on land. There are a few items from the Commission of Housing Affordability that were on the master list that are not in 181 or 360, but were supposed to be in there around condos and other things. So we're following up with Senator Fillmore and Representative White. So again, that's why you'll see our recommendation is support, recognizing there are going to be amendments and these bills will be moving pieces as they go along, but support the consensus and the collaboration that's occurred to date. Any questions on the CHA bills before we jump to the land use task force bills? Is there any questions online? Carson?
Yeah, there's a question from Zach Smallwood. Would this mean that cities would want to go through the 10-8 process if they're granting a lower rate?
Yeah, good question. So Zach from Murray was asking if they have to go through the 1082 process, which I believe is the fair market value analysis. I think that's what he's referencing. And so, yeah, this gives it that alternative path if a city wanted to go, a city or any public entity wanted to go down that path. So it's a tool, not a mandate, but trying to facilitate that sort of exchange. Okay. In that case, let's talk some land use. Well, let's just wrap up land use. We got meat and potatoes here, which is not part of the lunch for those online. That's not part of the lunch what people are eating in the room. But this terminology has been used quite a bit up here at the Capitol. The House Bill 368 is the meat and potatoes around improving land use processes, balancing the need for more efficiency with respecting local control and codifying some best practices. So with that, I'll turn it to Jared to walk us through that one.
Just a quick question. How many of you have read all 7,223 lines? Wow. Bless you. Thank you. Makes me feel better. So there are a lot of things in this bill, obviously. The large portion of it is the annexation portion. It clarifies a lot of the different things going on. Like Cam said, there is a lot in this bill. We've been working for months and months and months on all of these different provisions, quite a few of which we are very happy. For example, the land use noticing from a couple years ago has made it difficult and cost prohibitive. What this does is it basically eliminates those costs for simple land use amendments. Real property transfers. Some of you may have received property that you had no idea that you received. What this does is it basically gives cities notification that you are receiving land, and you have to agree to receive that land before a 6-inch piece of property that you now have to maintain comes over to you in your city. Transferable development rights. Right now, the development rights can be transferred within the city. And so to protect certain areas of your city from additional density, what this allows is it expands that and allows, so long as both a county or another adjacent city agrees to such, being a sending and receiving zone, depending on which one you are, transferring those and securing that, hey, we want to protect this area. And so we'd like to transfer what we do have here over to another portion to protect that area from additional increased density or any other development rights. So it really will help with regional planning, in my mind. The development standards. This is a clarification on the definition of what a land use regulation is. This would require, and has always required, development standards to be changed through a legislative process instead of just by administratively changing it, and all of a sudden you've got new development standards. This would require, just as it always has required, it's just a clarification that those development standards need to be approved legislatively. Land use appeals provision prohibits cities from requiring a land use or from not just requiring, but having a land use having a public hearing in a land use appeal. And given that it's a judicial body, quasi-judicial body, having public comment in a land use appeal doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The identical plans, many cities already do this. If there are substantially identical floor plans that are the same, a lot of times developers will come in or builders will come in and submit the same plan, a lot of different applications, but the same plan. And so this would require us to do a limited review. There would still be the geotech review. There would still be other aspects of the site plan review. But if that floor plan review is the same or substantially the same and doesn't require any structural changes, there would be essentially an expedited, only for the fact that you don't have to check everything because it's an identical plan. So that will affect your plan reviewers. So, like I said, many cities already do this. Skipping over, there's special districts, skipping over the special districts because we are cities and towns. So this was an ask by the PRC. So onto the bonding language. This will establish certain requirements for releasing the bonds once the improvement has been approved, and then also releasing the warranty bond at certain periods as well. So it standardizes how cities release their bonds and makes it a little bit more predictable when certain things are done and the timing of certain things. So that's the essence of the bonding language. Plan review timing has taken a very long time, but we finally landed on a process that I think will still help cities be able to allow cities to have a thorough review before the plan review of the building permit application actually starts. So this would be the completion time. In other words, checking before the plan review even starts, checking whether that application is complete, whether you have all the documents. And that would be a 3-day period. And then you still have that 14-day period for the plan review process. And with landscaping, this is one where last year we were prohibited from requiring developers from requiring them to put in landscaping. What this would do, or have to, and it did not require them to submit a building permit or building a landscaping plan. I'm dying here. This would clarify that they don't have to submit a landscaping plan because they are not required to submit or not required to put in landscaping. However, if they do put in landscaping, they still would be required to submit a landscaping plan if the city requires a landscaping plan. Fire access roads. This is just a clarification of current existing law. And then the private maintenance of public infrastructure. There were some cities that were requiring without any sort of an agreement, but by their code requiring developers to maintain public infrastructure. And so what this does is it prohibits that without a development agreement or some other agreement to make sure that private entities are not maintaining public infrastructure. And that is it. All 7,223 lines. Okay. I don't even want to ask for questions. Any questions? Okay, let's move on. Oh. All right.
Yeah, Jordan Hess, Washington City. Says staff recommendation is support with amendments. What are some of the main changes we're looking for to this bill?
So there will be, all that you see on the screen there are pretty much pretty solid. There may be one or two minor language changes, but what you see on the screen there, what those amendments would be are things that we're still negotiating. For example, there are some changes that we're looking for the Office of Property Rights Ombudsman. There's some other changes, but what you see on the screen is pretty baked and what we've been working on for months. And so what the amendments would be, if we agree with those amendments, then we would still support it. That answers your question. I saw.
So
Yeah.
Norm Beagley, Santa Clara again, just a quick thought on this. We require, for instance, that we don't take over thought until it's been established. We don't take over. I mean, we could potentially have tens of thousands of dollars worth of cost if somebody just puts a crappy sprinkler system in and throws the sod in and hands it over to the city and we're done. So I don't know how that affects anything, warranty times, that kind of thing. But there are some cases where their own maintenance is definitely necessary to make sure that we're being protected from the public side.
So you're talking about the private maintenance of public infrastructure? Okay. So in that regard, I think that you're right, as far as the warranty period goes, but that warranty period at the very end of the warranty period, unless you've got a development agreement that says that they maintain that public infrastructure, that wouldn't be allowed anymore. We've got two here.
Lisa Baskin, North Salt Lake City Council. In the bill at lines 3640 to 3928, it allows an applicant to use new code instead of old code if they submit a request within 30 days of when the new regulation goes into effect and makes process. I think that this language is very problematic. Normally, when one applies for a permit
Can someone
or
pull that up for
permission,
me?
it's the law in place at the time the request is made.
I worked on it, but I didn't memorize it. So we're getting the line here.
3640. The gist of it is it appears as though a person can have the benefit of 30 days hence from the time they apply. And I don't know anywhere else in the code. Maybe, Roger, in the tax code, we make things like this happen. Right. But I don't see it happening here in this. This is a question of rights at the time a person submits. It's a due process question. And I don't know if this is one that we can just easily concede on.
No, thank you for highlighting that. One thing I mentioned before on the CHA bills is that we had a meeting at 4 o'clock today. And part of the reason you've seen the language on the screen of support with amendments and with amendments is because we're going through at 4 o'clock with the Property Rights Coalition, working through those potential amendments. So we'll raise this and Jared, yeah, Jared's double checking it now, but we'll have to go back and remind ourselves where it came from. Oh, Jared, it just triggered his mind.
Okay, so what this is when there are new regulations and new laws that are put into place, there are some who are nowhere in this body that have said, well, we don't have to abide by those new regulations because we were under an old application. Well, new laws are new laws, and we've got to comply with them. And so that's where that comes from. That's where that is. Okay, well, we'll look at that and yeah.
Jared was quite diplomatic. We get calls all the time from applicants who basically say, here's what the state law says. We just passed this bill a year or two ago. And it's often counties, right? But nevertheless, we get calls all the time saying they are ignoring the law. And so that is part of what was trying to be addressed here too. But we'll bring it up at the 4 o'clock meeting. So did I see a hand in the back?
Cam, just,
Wilf, yep, go ahead.
just real quick to address that. So under the vesting law or under the application, city may want to change their code or ordinance, but an applicant comes in and makes an application before that change takes place. So they're then vested to go ahead with their application under the old code, even though the city may have changed it subsequently. What this provision, when I read it, what I understand it to say is if the applicant agrees and requests that they get reviewed under the new code, they can do that. But it's at the applicant's discretion whether they want to go under the new code or not. And if they do, they can make that request. That's what I understand this says.
Okay. We'll look at that language and we'll come back to that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Will Summercorn.
This is Ethan Smith from Mighton City. Two concerns I had, line 2811 to 2813. It removes the ability to require resubmittal for geotechnical issues, especially when there's a 2-day period on identical homes. That's concerning because the foundation is usually a rather large issue. And the other, again, the 3-day submittal, which is 2725 to 2760. I understand they want it to move along, but when one builder submitting 40 to 50 plans at a time, and same with identical homes, 3 days and 2 days is quite quick.
So I was looking up the lines for your first question. Why don't you Megan, can you come back here? At least on the second question with the identical plans, I think what you're saying is if we've got a 50 plans that come in and we've got 3 days to do that, from what we have gathered from UABO, which is Utah Association of Building Officials, the UCOLA, the code officials, that this identical plan language is not concerning because those floor plans are when it is truly an identical plan, there shouldn't be a lot of actual time taken on each of those reviews. Each completion review, each time we review for completion, I've been told it takes about 15 minutes. And if we've got 3 days to do those determining whether the plan is complete or not, they shouldn't take that much time. And so we were assured by UABO and others that would not be a concern. So,
Well, that's not what I'm hearing from other building officials, is because I believe there is a concern because the 3-day timeline, when you're getting so many plans from different developers, is pushing the limit.
okay.
Again, Mark Christensen with Saratoga Springs. As one of the highest permitting cities in the state, we get it, we understand it, but it's doable. And I realize, 50 building permits in a day, that's a big number. That's a big number for any of us, but we're making our way through it. So if it's a staffing problem, that's a staffing you need to recruit and hire. If that's consistent, if it's a one-off, totally get it. 3 days will be tough. But especially for the consistent high growth communities, we're doing this all the time anyway. So I think it's something that we should be able to accomplish.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes. So Cam wanted me to mention what the obligation is for builders to submit complete applications and the process of the plan review timing. So you see that up the fourth from the bottom there. This took a long time to negotiate, and what the current law is it's very vague. It doesn't require any specific number of days to determine whether the building permit application is complete or not. And so we've had some cities taking 30 days, 2 months, just to get back to them to say, hey, your application actually wasn't complete. We need this document. And so what this does is it gives us a time certain that we need to review those building permit applications within 3 days. If we find that that their building permit application is incomplete, in other words, they have not given us a document in that list in the code saying here's a complete application, that means that we can stop the timeline. And the timeline is told until they give us those documents that we need. After the 3-day period, though, that we've been given, after that period, we have to start our plan review and move forward with the documents that we have. And if if it ends up on day 10 or 5 days before the 14, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, if they still have not given us those documents, then however many days it takes, how do I explain this? The last 5 days, if they were to give us the document that we need on the 14th day of the plan review, then we have 5 more days to review that document in and of itself. If they gave it to us on the 12th day, we've got 2 more days because, let's see, 3 more days because that takes up from the 5 days. So we still have time to stop the process and say, we need this document. And if you don't give us that document, the time tolls within those last 5 days of the 14 days. I hope I've confused everyone in the room. It's so much easier to do a diagram, but we don't have one. But we will.
Teddy Hodges, Harriman City. What is the penalty? Was there a stick at the end of this? Because there's not been an enforceable action prior to this. Is there something specific in the bill that requires us to comply, or the ramifications if we don't?
Well, there still is in the bill. You won't see taken out of the language the ability of builders to continue forward without receiving an approval of the building permit. And so that's still in there. That has not been taken out. That's been in there for a while now, to where they don't need our approval if we don't get back to them within those 14 days. But that's been in there. So that would be the remedy for them if they don't get the documents to us.
Craig Smith, we represent a lot of smaller cities. So the public suffers is what I guess that's so the public suffers because they get a building that may not be properly inspected if we miss the deadline.
Well, I don't think that's...
Well, the purpose of building inspections is to protect the public.
Right.
And if we don't do something in time, that means they can just go ahead and build it without the inspections?
That was already in the code.
Well, that's bad public policy, no matter what it was.
And I agree with you, but that was already in the code. That was not part of the amendments that we're talking about
Well,
today.
I know we have a lot of bad things in the code. I've been around a long time, but I just feel like we should try to take that out because that's bad public policy. That's people's lives. You know, if you talk to certain building inspectors who are really experienced, and they'll tell you we should even have a uniform residential code. It should all be under the public uniform building code. Uniform residential code is much more lax, but we have that. I get it. But it seems like every year we're eroding more of what the public, protecting the public, which is, if we're not going to protect the public, why don't we just get rid of building codes and let people build whatever they want? And, you know, I'm not here to argue with you, but you see the point. We're getting to the point where we're not able to do our job, which is a city, is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public.
Thank you. One thing I should mention too is, and we've got Jerry and Rob in the...
So just Jerry Thompson, West Valley City Building Official. Just for quick clarification, if the plan review is not completed within the time frame allotted, the permit is issued. Inspections still have to be done. This is not because the plan review was not completed, it's not a pass go, don't go to jail card. You still have to have the building inspections. So for clarification, so what we're talking about here is just the plan review.
Thank you, Jerry.
I just have to get it first.
I was just going to make a motion that Craig Smith be nominated to take that policy argument to the legislature for us. We're right behind you, Craig, all the way.
Okay. I'm good. Yeah, I can do 58. Okay. I'm not done. So we talked about this last time. HB 58 is changes the qualifications of building officials that are required for building officials. The title of the bill is misleading. It says Building Inspector Amendments. What this does, though, is it changes the requirements of your building official to have 6 years of experience as an architect, engineer, inspector, plan examiner, contractor, superintendent of construction, or any combination of these, be actively licensed as a combination inspector, and have completed 40 hours of management training as established by the division in rule, or is a certified building official, meaning that they have taken the certified building official test. And it also has some other reporting requirements of how we're doing, and that's reported to the Utah Building Code Commission, as well as delivered to the legislature each year. When we asked this, and I wanted to show this, the surveys that we received 44 responses, mainly from smaller cities, saying 43% of the responding cities have building officials who meet all 3 requirements to be a building official. 81% had 2 of the 3 criteria, and 100% met at least one of the requirements. And so initially, the concern was, how is this going to affect smaller cities that don't have building officials that may not have all of these requirements? At least from those 44 responses that we got, it looks like we're well on the way of still meeting all of those requirements. And we're still in communication with the sponsor, Representative Peterson, and looking at possibly any ramp up to allow a little bit more time to comply with these provisions. And so there's still negotiating happening on this, but this gives you an idea of how that will affect smaller cities with the 44 responses. Any questions on that?
Dirk Burton, West Jordan City.
Okay. Yes.
Our city has no problem with this because it won't really affect us because we fit to that anyway. But my question is, some cities don't have combination inspectors. They have an electrical inspector and a plumbing inspector. How would it affect them?
They would need to get their combination inspection before being a building official.
Nathan Bracken, City Attorney for Copperton, but I also represent a number of other cities. I have a question. Towards the end of this bill, there's some language I think that would add some additional violations for unprofessional conduct for building inspectors. And one of those is, some of them feel pretty subjective, including one that says a failure to maintain, I think, a current understanding of current law. Can you explain how that's going to be determined? Because one of the conflicts I see or experience is the city has one interpretation of an ambiguous provision code, the developer has another. Is this something that could potentially be used to attack the licensing of a building official? They take a position the developer doesn't like?
Well, you've got a great point. It's a point that we brought up before, and we will continue to bring up with the sponsor, and that is concerning language for us as far as the definitions. Like I said, we're still working on amendments to those provisions as far as defining what unprofessional conduct means. So all I can say is that we're still working on it.
Are we conflating building inspector with building official, or not we? Is this bill doing that? Because if you follow the definition in the building code, there only needs to be one building official for each community.
Correct.
And the other people can be building inspectors.
Correct.
So is this?
So this is building officials. This is talking
So this
about
is just
building
the
officials.
building official.
Yep. Not
Okay.
not
Great.
building inspectors.
Great, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Craig Smith again, the
Oh, I know
author
who
of
you are, Craig.
Lost Causes.
Okay. Let's see. Carson?
All right, SB 179. We discussed this bill, or the concept before this was numbered LPC a little while ago. Basically, the bill would require local governments to adopt an ordinance governing how they will evaluate new and unlisted business uses for zoning consideration. And then it would also place a 60-day shot clock on that. I was amused when I read Wilf's blog the other day, and he pointed out that this seems like this is already the case in state law, and it is. So basically, my understanding is that the sponsor is trying to improve the accessibility of information and streamline the process for people who are not necessarily your traditional land use practitioners who are not familiar with the process. So I'm actually going to ask the first Slido question, which I've been told to do this very quickly. So one of the ideas that we've thrown around internally is potentially just requiring local governments to, rather than putting in their code, put it somewhere either on their website or their application, land use application form, spelling out the process that's listed in 109A 502, 8502. Basically the statute that governs the process for modifying it. I've seen some cities that have this listed out in great detail with graphics and timelines. We haven't gotten to specifics yet, but I wanted to take your temperature on this kind of general approach. I'm going to move over to the question. I wanted to take your temperature on this general approach before we go back to the bill sponsor and other stakeholders. So again, just focusing on how do you feel about just having to put that explanation in your land use application form or on your website. All right, I've been told we need to move pretty quickly, so I'll just give people another second to fill this one out. Awesome. And if anybody has any other suggestions or really cares passionately about this, please let me know. I'll continue to work with managers and planners to try to figure out a process that can help get better public information out to non-practitioners while not just costing a lot of money to duplicate things in different codes. All right, ready for broadband? Yeah.
Chip this over on anybody. I want to talk about SB 165, which is the broadband bill. And I'm going to condense 24 years of contentious political history in about 3 minutes to lay as a sort of a predicate for this bill. In 2000, Provo City's incumbent cable company went bankrupt. Is Isaac here? The mayor at that time decided to say Provo City was going to buy that cable company and run it. The legislature reacted that year by passing legislation that prohibited all cities from owning telecommunications infrastructure, including broadband in the state of Utah. There were 3 exceptions that got grandfathered. I think the primary one is Spanish Fort South. And that's because they had basically, I believe, approved their bonds just days before the legislation. And so basically I was scrambling to write exemptions out for 3 cities. The other 2 were Levan and Manaway, which I don't think still have their systems now. But everybody else was prohibited. Well, 2 years later, a couple of us had the idea that it prohibited retail, but it did prohibit wholesale. So the concept of forming interlocal agreements to do wholesale providers, we didn't sell the product. Basically, cities were putting the pipe in the ground, was conceived. And the original cities operated under the acronym Utopia, which many of you have heard. I'm not here to on spokesman for Utopia, but they're the history behind this. And in effect, there were 11 cities that basically through a long contentious period built out their cities, provided a wholesale operation, and are functioning today. that was also a period of, I will say, there were at least 3 major lawsuits that went through. And I will say during that period, we thought there was a basic agreement over what the structure was of how we operated. I see my good friend Eric Isom back there. Eric and I were probably the only two that were around at that time, and we were on opposite sides. We still remain very close friends in that period. But essentially, what we saw, though, was over time, other cities wanted to look at the option. And some of them became partners with Utopia. Others used different approaches to build out their wholesale operation, but they were always wholesale. Basically, they were putting a pipe in the ground. Who was providing the service could have been any of a number of people. And I live in Centerville. My mayor's here. We were one of the original cities that dealt with Utopia. Sumo's my provider, but I think there's 10 or 11 other ones that you could have. Those were basic to the concepts that were there. Senate Bill 165 is the first legislation we've seen in a long time that basically sort of reframes the rules of how municipal broadband is going to operate. And when I say reframe, I don't necessarily say that's bad. I'm just simply saying it is a reframing of those rules. And so I wanted you to know that history, because we've got a number of cities now, other than the original 11 from Utopia, and as well as a number of other cities that are Utopia partners in that process. So we got a number of municipal broadband operators in the state of Utah. I do have to say one editorial comment. During the bitter debate, and Eric, you'll remember this. It wasn't you, but I believe it was maybe, I won't say the company, who stood up and protested and said, when we talked about the speed and capacity of fiber, basically said, nobody needs that much speed and nobody needs that much capacity. Famous last words. But the point to be made is 165 sort of changes the rules. And I think it's important to note that it basically divides the world into the cities that are there now, essentially are grandfathered under their current operation. But it sets a new set of rules going forward. And the principal issue amongst those is it requires a vote for revenue bonding that is included. Nowhere in the code do we have a requirement for elections on revenue bonds. There are for GO bonds because you're pledging the full faith and credit property tax. So that's one of the issues that's problematic in this issue, as well as some new reporting requirements. Now the bill, I have not gone through it with the depth of other people that have. So Gary, if you have comments you want to make right now, now's a good time because they don't need my history lesson beyond what I've laid out here.
Yeah, it's probably worth providing just a little bit more detail about what the bill does and why we have some concerns with it. For context sake, Bountiful started our fiber utility about 1.5 years ago. We weren't interested in doing it until after COVID. And we had many, many residents complain about their access to broadband speeds. We, after working with the incumbents to see if they would step up to the plate, held 22 different public meetings and studied it over 3 years before we decided to ultimately pull the trigger and get involved. So there was a lot of deliberation involved. Roger's right that this basically creates 2 classifications now of broadband cities. In part, what this bill does is, or at least what it was advertised as, is codifying requirements that are already required by the Federal Telecommunications Act. Much of that we're not very concerned about. It was also advertised as a leveling of the playing field between the incumbent providers, the private sector, and public sector. It doesn't really do that. It goes sort of beyond a level playing field. This was shared with us when the session started, not beforehand. It's fairly technical, so it's kind of detailed. But these are the general requirements of cities that currently operate their own municipal system, partner with Utopia, or are Utopia cities. You must provide the same access to your infrastructure that you would provide yourself. So if you have a power line that you put fiber on, you've got to allow the incumbent providers to do that. That's already in federal law. This expands that to include things like conduit, which is undefined. What size of conduit, how much, is a little bit of a concern for us. It also says that we can't discriminate in how we administer federal funding or state or local funding. We don't really know what that means, and the sponsor wasn't very helpful in explaining that to us either. The two major things that this bill does for existing cities is it requires a pretty onerous annual report that includes coming up with projections that we have to provide. We have to do a full accounting of the utility, and on top of that, we have to also provide all the information to the public and to the city council that we're already providing to bondholders with continuing disclosure. And then you have to hold a public hearing that lets the public weigh in on that, even though we all know how much our public loves public hearings when you can't actually do anything with the public input they're giving. It's a public hearing, but there's no action involved other than the council mandatorily adopting the report. For future cities, so anybody who wants to get into providing service for their residents, it has two major components. The first is that it creates a separation of functions between regulation and the service provision. You can't use any of the same people, infrastructure, property for the utility that you use for regulation. So, and you also can't share data between the two that's non-public. So it creates basically a firewall between the two, which of course would increase costs. But the other one that really shouldn't bother us all is, as Roger said, it would require anybody who wants to use a sales tax revenue bond to fund the construction of the system to receive a voter approval. This would be the first time in statute that a revenue bond requires voter approval. So those are the details in writ large. Happy to answer any questions. We did talk with the sponsor today, Bountiful City did, and he just nodded his head when we raised some of these issues. I think he's willing to consider some amendments around the edges, but he did say that the sales tax revenue bond was a very important part of the bill. So
I'll make this observation. A lot of water's gone over the bridge over the years, and there was a need to sit down and re-examine the basic structure. That probably is a good idea. It would have been nice to have us involved with that and seeing it before it gets dropped at the beginning of the session. But that's might be a cosmetic issue. But basically where we are is two things. The Slido question we wanted to ask here is over the precedential nature of the revenue bond election, because this is a new thing. Then I'll pose another question after that.
Yeah, it's great. It's up there. So.
Oh, it's up there.
Yep.
And while you're answering that issue, let me indicate it's hard to know what the universe is of cities out there who are likely to go forward on change. We've had a lot that have done it. I don't think the universe is every city, because I don't think every city wants to do it. Some are perfectly happy with what they have. Bear in mind,
don't answer. Could I make after
Sure.
you're done, before you guys answer that, would you mind, would you yield the floor for a minute?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, so my name is Sean Guzman, St. George City. And I was 3 years old. I was here for that fight, and that was probably 22 years ago, because I was brand new as a city attorney down in St. George. Okay, so let me tell you about St. George. 5th largest city, 6th largest city in the state, depending on what you look at right now, was 17th largest when I started. There are large areas of our existing city right now that do not have broadband. And our incumbent carriers have said they are not going to overbuild that area. But we are still paying the same price that you all in the Wasatch and some of the rural cities in Washington County that got federal grants to their carriers did to put in to the home. But we still pay the same per gig. Now, let me tell you that we have those most affordable houses in our city are located in those areas. Those kids that live there deserve to have high-speed broadband, but more importantly,
are young families that are entrepreneurs or starting a job that requires them to work from home, they need to have that broadband capability. Now, you've heard about the billions of dollars that the last administration put in broadband across the country. But you know what the industry did in that bill? They said that that's only for areas that do not meet the minimum. The minimum standards are 100 meg up and down, symmetrical. Yeah, I guarantee you no member of Congress is existing on 100 meg right now, and they're not watching Netflix on that. So again, now people will ask me like they did back when we had that fight, why does St. George, if they have areas that no one will, they make those areas viable because all of our green fields have multiple carriers. Lastly, what I will say is the infrastructure that was put in, that's being put in by Santa Clara, our neighboring city right now, what it will do is just provide the pipeline. So all of those incumbent carriers saying they need a playing field because anyone can get on that new pipeline that they're building. They can carry multiple carriers. So those existing down there in Washington County that will not overbuild can simply contract with Utopia and be on that line and serve those citizens. So that's the story that is not getting out there. And it feels a lot like that same fight we had 20 plus years ago about having a level playing field, one, and serving those underserved areas that will never be served by the incumbent carriers. Thank you. Now you can vote.
They can't vote yet because I have some thoughts I want to share too. Sean, Kate Bradshaw, Bountiful. As you're considering how you feel about this particular Slido question, Gary Hill has shared some of our experience in Bountiful. But I would tell you, I have emails I sent to residents in 18 and 19 where I told them the private market would solve this and we didn't need to do it. And then I went through a pandemic and I spent 2 years begging the incumbent carriers to do something. And they wouldn't. They had no capital plans for my city. And so we engaged in an effort to look at various alternatives. My residents feel like we spent a ridiculous amount of time because it took us nearly 2 years to decide what to do and how to do it. And we looked at all kinds of public-private partnerships. We did an RFI to ask the incumbents for ideas, and they wouldn't engage. When they did decide to engage, they had plenty of money to spend on a signature gathering effort. And this is what I would warn you about if we don't stand and defend this particular provision. We as cities will not be able to do anything but stand and provide neutral information while we take punch after punch from people who are not going to be bound to provide the same type of neutral, balanced, thoughtful, accurate information, who won't disclose their service maps, who won't disclose the speeds. So some cities will not be ready for this until they're ready. I was not ready until I went through a 2-year religious experience to come to this particular policy point of view. But you have to remember that if we allow the revenue bonds to go to a public vote, unlike anything else we may do in the public utility space that obligate revenues to a long-term significant public utility project, that we will be incredibly beat up individually as elected officials, and our cities will be beat up, and our hands will be tied behind our back while those incumbent providers get to levy all kinds of information. So keep that in mind, please, as you consider how you feel about this.
Seth Perrin, Spanish Fork City. I was told I have to be fast, so I'll be as fast as Spanish Fork Internet. This bill really, at this moment, is about two major issues. The first one, maybe most important to all of us, is the revenue bonds and having revenue bonds reach into other aspects of our operations. Nothing necessarily to do with broadband. If we have revenue bond requirements like this to vote on for water, sewer, or other utilities, it would be very, very difficult, could be very difficult for us. Secondarily, as I'm listening to some of the comments made, that is exactly our story from 25 years ago. Nothing has changed. I'm not sure why. Well, I probably am, but I won't go into all those details. Nothing has changed. what has changed is cities that have taken up the issue have really solved problems for their residents. So keeping the opportunities open for others is, I think, critical for us and our city's successes.
All right. The wrap up is we have 30 minutes of stuff to talk about in 10 minutes. So we're going to rapid fire through some things. If I can get back. So public safety. So HB 40 school safety amendments from Representative Wilcox. This was substituted last week in committee as we predicted it would be. They took a lot of the language that had been suggested. Thanks to Dave Quayle from Salt Lake for doing a lot of work on that one and coordinating on that one. It puts a lot of it back on the county. There are some pieces we would still like to see tweaked a little bit. Right now, the county security chief is able to make some pretty big assessments and decide what is adequate and what is not. And we'd like to see that tweaked a little bit, but it is a much better place than it was. So stay tuned to see if there's anything else that changes on that one. But there's a quick one. Moving over. And then I'm going to grab. Yep.
All right, folks. My turn to go micro machine man on you here. We do have a couple of Slido questions though. I'm going to quickly hit transportation. Then I'm going to come back to billboards because we have a Slido question on billboards. SB 195 is Senator Harper's bill. And really the main thing here is if you're a city that has challenges with canals in your city, contact league staff today because we're going to put together a quick work group this week. We met with Senator Harper this morning. He said wants to solve the problem around road and trail connectivity where you have dead ends at canals. He's not married to the specific language in the bill. There is language in here about withholding B and C funds, and we told him that that was a non-starter for us. He acknowledged why that would be a non-starter for us, but said, I want to solve this connectivity challenge. So if you're a city that has challenges with canals in your city, there's Carson online, drop a note. We're opposed as drafted. He knows that, but we're going to work on this week. So if you want to be involved in that work group, let us know. So we'll skip that Slido question. Let me go to billboards. Okay. House Bill 198. We told you last week that I had met with the outdoor advertising industry representatives last Monday, which is not in time to be able to prepare for LPC. So the problem that they're trying to solve starts with the I-15 reconstruction in South Davis County and northern Utah County, or excuse me, northern Salt Lake County, but also the language in the bill right now could affect any sort of reconstruction or widening of state roads anywhere. So House Bill 198 takes the three areas of current code where there are some buffers around relocation rights and removes those buffers. So it says that basically you would be able to relocate a billboard anywhere along the same road if that relocation is triggered by the renovation or the construction, reconstruction, or demolition of a state road. And those buffers vary if it's an interstate versus a state highway, but that's the general concept. So the two primary concerns that we've shared with the industry are first, that removing that radius actually shifts the compensation burden to us. So think of it this way. State expands I-15. That's a state action. By expanding I-15, that forces the relocation of billboards that can't exist there anymore because now there's a lane of traffic where the billboard used to be. But if that billboard can move anywhere, but there's nowhere for that city, nowhere in that city where it works, then we are responsible to buy out the billboard rather than UDOT. Okay, so that's the financial concern. And then the second concern is the impact on local zoning authority if you allow billboards in certain areas and not in other areas. 2 points that they asked us to make to this group before we do the Slido questions is one, this language does not contemplate an increase in billboards. It's relocation of existing billboards. And second, unlike the fight we had a few years ago up here, this does not have anything related to upgrading billboards. So it just gets to that question of what triggers the relocation and then how much flexibility is there around relocation. Here's what else you need to know. Under state and federal law, there are other buffers around billboard placement. And so for example, you cannot have a billboard within 500 feet of another billboard around an interchange or what's listed up here. Now, there are some exceptions to these, but generally speaking, no billboards within 500 feet there and no billboards in residential areas. Again, some exceptions, some grandfathering, but that's the general concept. And then there's the compensation piece. So we had a billboard work group that met last Friday morning, and we brainstormed a variety of alternatives to try to help solve the problem. Because coming back to this piece, if you think about the I-15 reconstruction in Davis and Salt Lake counties, it's going to be quite massive. And there'll be new interchanges. And once you have new interchanges, that triggers that additional 500 feet piece. And some of these other 500 pieces come into play. And all of a sudden that mile is no longer functionally a mile, because if you've got a billboard, if you're trying to move a billboard here and the mile is here, but there's a billboard and there's an interchange, all of a sudden that mile is fragmented. And so that's the problem they're trying to solve, is more flexibility of those fragmented spaces. Now, their initial proposal is just to open it up anywhere, which our work group said went too far, but we talked about a variety of options. Now, these are the ideas that came from our group. So must relocate within the same city. You could go to a neighboring city if there's an agreement, but you can't require it in a neighboring city. May go to the other side of the road. So right now that's unclear in current law. Better define what triggers relocation, expand that 1 mile if certain conditions are met. Like, for example, as I was just saying, if your mile is fragmented, then you would have additional distance where you could move. Require more of UDOT with the relocation plan in the EIS, or revisiting the calculation of value billboard. And that one would be a much bigger policy issue to address. Okay, I recognize we're short on time, but we are meeting with the outdoor advertising industry again tomorrow. And so we wanted to take a broader snapshot of the full LPC of those ideas that came out of our work group on Friday. So do I press anything else, Carson, or do I just leave it up like this and it shows? Okay. So there are 8 options that are in your Slido question on your phones. And those 8 options basically summarize what I was just describing of alternatives to just removing that mile buffer. And so we want you to give us a sense of like, yeah, this one doesn't really bother me. This one's very concerning. I'm going to pause there to see if there are any clarifying questions about what I presented, both about what current law already allows and requires versus the alternatives that came out of our work group on Friday. Okay, if there are no questions, feel free to ask questions of any of the options that are listed there. Question about the assumption on the freeway. So there's some questions that are about the interstate and some questions that are not about the interstate. Right now, the bill contemplates both. And so one of the ideas that came out of the work group on Friday was, well, what if we just, if we make any changes to code, just have those changes apply to relocation near the interstate rather than other roads. So thank you, Seth. Yeah, any other clarifying questions? It is hard, Dave. Yeah, it was a hard conversation on Friday trying to figure out if there was a path forward. While you're filling this out, I'll keep it open for a few moments longer. I want to thank the people who participated in that work group on Friday morning. If your city is going to be impacted by not just I-15 reconstruction in Davis County and Salt Lake counties, but other potential construction or reconstruction of interstates or state roads, please make sure to follow up with us. We will likely reconvene that group later this week after we've met with the outdoor advertising industry tomorrow. This bill has not yet been scheduled for a committee, but may be on committee before we next meet as LPC, which is why we're asking these questions now. So I'll leave this open for another moment, and then I have another Slido question for us. We do have to be out of here in about 5 minutes because they need to turn the room for a legislative committee. So I'll leave this open to make sure people have a chance to fill it out. So Molly, let me do this. There's one more Slido question. I'll do the last Slido question and then let you wrap it and then turn it over to Councilmember Bradshaw for ratification. Does that work? Okay. I'm going to leave this one over about 20 more seconds. Perfect. I'm already getting texts, people saying, please include us in the Billboard work group, which is great. And that's one thing I just, while I'm letting this question finish up here, I just want to emphasize how often we use work groups on different topics. So when Jared was up talking about the land use bills, the land use task force has been meeting for months, working through and hashing things out. I want to thank the UCOLA and what's the other acronym? UABO, because we've been meeting regularly with them throughout the interim to try to get to solving some problems through those bills. We have the work group on the tourism taxes. We have the work group on billboards. We request your participation if you have canals in your city. So the more you involve with us, then the better advocates we can be for you up here in between LPCs. Okay, I'm going to move on because of time, and I'm going to skip to the last Slido question, and then Molly will come back to you. Okay. So this will be our last Slido question of the day. This is actually an issue we brought to LPC about 3 months ago. What's the bill number now for this one? 295. House Bill 295. And this is the issue around municipal lien authority. And we've had some back and forth with the bill sponsor. And so this is actually a question that came to us from the bill sponsor. And we said we would ask it at LPC. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
You just emailed me literally a minute ago saying, what was the results? So
Yeah, yep. No, for better or for worse, our Slido results are becoming more and more famous up here. People want to know what the broad membership is thinking on different issues. So this will be a helpful data point for us. We'll leave this open for about 30 more seconds as well. We've got 3 more minutes, so hang with us. I'm going to turn it over to Molly to hit homelessness, and then we'll come back to Councilmember Bradshaw. Thank you, everybody. Again, online, we almost hit 200, and then another 130 plus in the room. So thank you, everybody, for your participation. Molly, go ahead. Leave that open if you
I will be fast. There are homelessness bills. The ones that will impact cities are going to change. We are going to remain, or I recommend we remain, position pending until we know their changes. Thank you for your time.
Not recognizing that motion. Okay. Thanks for the robust discussion, everyone, on these issues. Do we have a motion to approve the league's bill tracker as currently constituted? Apparently, I am not taking that motion yet because we are addressing a comment online.
Question about the motion. No, it's a question about the motion.
Remade. It's been remade. Okay. All in favor of approving, and we had a second back here.
Just answer that question because it's about. Okay, we have a question online about House Bill 355, which is the new gravel bill that came out this morning. And we had a work group meeting on that right before LPC, so it wasn't ready to present broadly. So our position on it as of now is position pending, because again, we finished that work group meeting right before we came here, and Mayor Walker and Justin were in that meeting and then just had to leave to go to a property tax meeting with House leadership. So Paul, our recommendation is position pending until we can get some more feedback from the people who were in that meeting. And then that's one we're working with the officers throughout the week. We can change that recommendation working with the officers if it moves between now and Monday, and then we'll present it next Monday. Thanks.
Okay, we're back to our motion to approve the bill tracker. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the positions on the tracker, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll rule that passes, and we will see you guys next Monday, same bat time, same bat channel.